I am super grateful for you as a human being and everything you've just brought into my life. And I want to share you to the world. As weird as that may sound, I think what you offer and the community you've built is what a lot of men need. I'm Jody with the Resilient Addict, and I'm here today with my friend and fellow. Oh boy, I'm going to do a lot of editing, Jeremy. I am so excited to have you on this podcast that I am launching. My heart, my goal is to bring people like you to the forefront of this world because you have done such amazing things in this space in helping men. And I'm just so thankful that you're here today with me talking about this issue that plagues a lot of people around the world. It's not talked about. There's so much shame around it. And I'm just thankful you're willing to take the time to share not only your path, your journey, but what it is you bring to help other men who struggle with not only porn addiction, but other addictions that surround porn. And I'm just thankful for you being here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here and really a delight, to see what you've started with this podcast and with the work that you're doing. I mean, it brings a lot of joy to my heart. So happy to be here, happy to share anything. I'm an open book. So happy to go anywhere you want to go.
Awesome, brother. Well, I'd love it if you could just introduce yourself a little bit. What, maybe a brief history about your journey, what brought you here, and what it is you do in this community. I'll just quickly, before you jump in, I'll just speak how I became to know you is I was in the bowels of going through hell in my marriage. And I was trying to grasp at any limb that I could, lifeline I could, that would help me understand what it is I had done, why I had done it, and how I'd gotten where I'd gotten. And so I stumbled across a YouTube podcast you had done where you were highlighting Martha Beck's book, The Way of Integrity. And I knew that I was struggling with integrity. And I went through that whole series. I watched every video you put together, one after the other, about her book. And so one, it prompted me to order the book. But two, after beginning to read that book, I reached out to you and I was like, how can I get more of what it is you're offering? So tell us a little bit about you and how you got started.
Yeah, I guess the high level overview of what I do now, I'm a men's coach, a meditation teacher, founder of Unhooked Academy, the program that I run, and host of the Unhooked podcast. That's, where you found me, is the Unhooked podcast. But all that stuff that I do now comes from my own personal experience with porn addiction, sex addiction, and then all the other flavors of addiction, looking for external validation, pleasure, junk food, video games, all the different ways I was escaping. And so I went through my own journey of addiction and recovery and found my way out of it, mostly through a combination of Buddhist mindfulness practices, different kinds of positive psychology, neuroplasticity, really understanding the mind. My approach is very much a shame-free, compassion-based approach. It's a non-religious approach as well, which is important for me, being a non-religious person. And for a lot of the guys I work with who want kind of a more secular approach to addiction recovery. So it's a long journey. It involves a lot of twists and turns, time spent as a monk. I have a background in science and genetics, but really it comes down to my own personal experience with addiction and recovery and what I learned along the way. I found that it would be helpful to share some of those things. And so that's when I started doing this work at this point, about 7 years ago is when I started focusing on this issue of porn addiction for men. Before that, I was teaching meditation mostly and just helping people with mental health and wellness, learning how to meditate, learning how to practice mindfulness and equanimity and self-compassion. But I realized there was this need for going deeper for a lot of people. So that's a high level overview of who I am and where I come from.
What did you do before you did this?
So my background is in the sciences. I was studying genetics and genomics. Before that, I was studying evolutionary biology, was working my way up, to try to be a research professor at a tier 1 university. For most of my young adult life, that was my career trajectory. I had gotten a full ride scholarship to Duke University for my PhD, had grants from the National Science Foundation. So I was very much a high achiever and on track to be an academic and a research professor. And it was in between undergrad and grad school. So once I finished undergrad and before I started graduate school, where I started learning about meditation and discovered my own addiction to pornography. And that's when meditation became a huge part of my life, just a part of my own mental health and recovery. And so throughout grad school, I was meditating and really diving into that world. And I started teaching meditation to other graduate students and undergrads just for fun, just as a way to keep myself accountable. And after doing that for about 4 years or 4.5 years, I was teaching more and more and giving talks on Buddhist philosophy and all these things. And I just realized I was way more passionate about meditation and mindfulness and teaching people about understanding their minds than I was about the research I was doing. And so I made the decision after 4.5 years in my PhD program, I decided to leave. So I ended up leaving my program. They gave me a master's degree. So I have a master's just because I was there long enough. But I decided to just fully leave academia, leave behind the sciences, and commit my life to teaching people about meditation and mindfulness. And that's when I ended up traveling to Asia. I moved to Thailand to teach mindfulness in an international school at first, and then ended up staying and just teaching meditation retreats. So my background is really in the sciences, but then it started to transition more into meditation and mindfulness.
That's admirable. And
Mm.
I can resonate with that. I'm a high school dropout. And I've been a business owner and a CEO for the last almost 30 years now. I've gone back to school. I'm going to school right now and getting my credentials for a lot of things that are important to me. But it's one of those things where my passion for business, it seemed like school just got in the way per se.
Hmm.
I didn't need that. I didn't need that training. So I'm curious, you mentioned mindfulness several times. Do you find that just mindfulness alone is enough to keep men? And I know this isn't just a man problem. I mean, the numbers are staggering right now with the amount of females that are becoming addicted to porn. But do you find that mindfulness alone is enough to avoid those traps?
The short answer would be no. The longer answer would be it could. And what I mean by that is if you devoted your full life to mindfulness training and went off to ordain as a monk and it really consumed your life in the way that it did for me, then it could be enough to bring you to a place of freedom. But I think for the majority of people who are lay people who are, living life, going to work, they have family, it's not going to be enough. And it's really important to have these other supports for recovery, things like community and connection and accountability, habit, behavioral architecture kind of techniques of understanding your environment and making sure that you're setting yourself up for success, doing inner work, therapy, coaching. There's so many things that can bolster recovery and support it and that are really needed for most people. I wouldn't recommend trying to just do mindfulness alone. It did kind of work for me, but that's because I ended up going to India and kind of ordaining as a monk at some point and going on these silent meditation retreats, and it really consumed my life. But it would have been so much faster and deeper, my recovery, if I had added some of these extra supports in recovery, like being a part of a community, finding a men's group, getting professional support. There's a lot of other things that I would recommend for people to do. But mindfulness is such an important component, just that awareness of what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you so much. I'm at this place now where I've done a lot of that hard work in my journey. My marriage is thriving. I feel like I am thriving as a human being and an individual on this planet. Just it's fascinating because I realized somewhere along that line after reading and meditating and journaling and that I am the keeper of my mind. Like I am sitting at the seat of consciousness. And when a fantasy, for instance, will pop into my mind, which is, I consider that a fleeting thought. I don't know if you have a name for that, but a fleeting thought will pop into my mind and I have the choice whether to entertain that or not. And I see that now. I see that like that seed that is like just comes out of nowhere and I can either choose to act on that or I can be like, no, like let it in. This isn't something I want or need. I don't want to hurt my wife. I don't want to hurt other people I love, whatever it is. And it's something that I can move away from. And I think something that, just to speak a little bit further on that, one thing I learned from you, which was absolutely instrumental in my healing, was this idea of instead of pushing something away, letting it in. I think you said it, the way you said it was invite it in like you're having tea with it. And that was a huge moment for me where I realized like, no, wait a minute, these feelings that are coming up for me, I usually just bury them or numb from them or run away from them. instead of doing that, I'm going to sit with them. I'm going to journal them, and I'm going to speak about them, especially to like my wife. If something comes up where I'm having a feeling, I'm able to speak to her and say, I'm really missing you right now when you're at work, or I'm feeling hurt that you haven't called me all day. Right. And so, whereas in the past I would have buried that, I wouldn't want to hurt her feelings or whatever the reason was, I wouldn't have brought that up. And so I would have sat with that, and that pain would have built, I think. So yeah, that's just an amazing concept that I think you really helped me with.
And for me, it's a core critical concept that people in recovery have got to understand, which is understanding that pushing things away, running away from pain, running away from unpleasant emotions, it just exacerbates the causes of the addiction, which is this: if I could just escape this feeling, then I'll be okay. And that's what makes us run into drugs, substances, behaviors that help us numb out. The antidote to that is learning how to make space for those unpleasant emotions. When you're feeling sadness or loneliness or grief or lust, because lust is an unpleasant emotion too. When you're feeling any one of those things, instead of saying, how can I medicate this away and numb this out and escape this feeling? If you can say, oh, okay, this is arising right now, and let me welcome this in and not run from this and make space for this experience, you don't have to numb out. And so the capacity for doing that is what we call equanimity. Building up this ability to be with what's difficult without running away from it is a mental muscle that you can strengthen. And that's what part of mindfulness training is strengthening those muscles, one of which is equanimity, but there's a whole host of other mental traits that we can strengthen.
That's beautiful. It is beautiful. And I think you said it best. I mean, just being able to sit with those feelings and invite them in. Something that came up for me the other day, I was having a really rough moment with my son, and I started to feel some rage. And I immediately had to go to a place of like sitting with that rage and allowing that anger to kind of just fester and come through, and really try to understand it rather than, because I think is we're taught as young men or boys that anger and rage is not okay. I know for me it was. I don't know about you, but it was one of these things where, like, I was disconnected from my feelings. The feelings were not okay to show. It was kind of like pick yourself up and move on.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is whether or not, we feel it's okay or not okay, those emotions are going to, be driving the bus if we're not aware of them. So if rage is there, if we're not aware of it, it will be the one driving the bus. And so this goes back to that mindfulness component, is that the very first step, the foundation that all of this is built off of, is awareness of what's happening. So like the ability that you had in that moment to be aware that rage was there gave you then the opportunity to say, oh, okay, do I want to act on this? Is that going to be skillful? Is that going to lead to my son behaving in a better way? Is it going to lead to me feeling in integrity? Or is there a different way I want to act? And that is mindfulness. That's the awareness part.
That's beautiful. That brings up it brings up so many things for me when you mention integrity. In reading Martha Beck's book, The Way of Integrity, one of the big takeaways from that you helped me see, but also actually diving in and reading the whole book, which if anybody hasn't gotten that book and read it, for me it was life changing. Was this concept of being in integrity to ourselves? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's the most important place to be in integrity, is with yourself. And, to be in alignment with your own values and treating yourself and living your life the way that you know you need to be living. Because that's when we're out of integrity with ourselves, that's where it causes the most damage also. That self-harm, the way that we sabotage our own happiness and disregard our own values and do things out of integrity. It's such a pain in the sense of a pain on the soul, like inner turmoil of real suffering when we're out of integrity with ourselves. And so it starts there. I mean, it starts with self-honesty and getting back to integrity with yourself.
Another thing you mentioned that I really found was so pivotal in my recovery was community. Finding a community of men who not only been through these struggles and is going through these struggles, but I think for the first time in my life, I was able to connect with other men, period. And not only did we have something in common, but to be able to open up and be vulnerable and to start to turn that shame around that I had been feeling all my life was huge. And so I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about the community you've built, and how you see that playing such a huge role in men living in recovery and recovering.
Yeah, man, it's so unassuming but so powerful. Just being a community, But as you say, like, especially when it's a community of men, and especially when it's a community of men who are going through a shared struggle where you can actually be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm struggling with porn, or I'm struggling with fantasies of infidelity and these feelings of being ashamed. When you can share what you feel ashamed of and you're met with compassionate, non judgmental, kind faces, I think that is the most healing thing that can happen in recovery, is to open up your heart and soul and realize I don't have to be ashamed. I don't have to be afraid of people finding out. So for myself, it was something that I just realized how important it was, and it's what I wanted to build this community around, is that sense of a safe, non-judgmental space where we could just be real. And the non-judgmental part is also so important, because there's a lot of stuff in the recovery world that is built off of shame, whether it's sexual shame or just, get your shit together and, be stronger and all that kind of thing. And there's a place for that kind of tough love, but we also need to balance it with kind of just understanding, hey, I see you're trying and I see you haven't given up, and we're here for you. And it also goes back to my understanding, what I learned from Buddhist philosophy. And in Buddhism, there's this thing called the triple gem. It's like these three gems of Buddhism, and it's the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And the Buddha is kind of just the epitome of the qualities we want to aim for, being a virtuous person, and being compassionate and kind and wise and all these things. Dharma is just the truth, the way things are. And then Sangha is the community. And it's so interesting because there's this one teaching in Buddhism where, the Buddha's right hand man, his name was Ananda, said, "Oh, I've just had this great insight. I think that Sangha, or community, must be a whole half of the spiritual life." And the Buddha turns to him and he says, not so, Ananda. Community is all of the spiritual life. And it's really this understanding that community and our connection with others is really what it's all about. At being a community, the way we relate with others and interact with others, how we're showing up for others, is really what it's all about. That you can't have freedom if you're doing it in isolation. So for anyone out there listening, I mean, if you're on a path of exploring your addiction and thinking, man, I need to look into this and get some support, finding a community, finding some way to connect with other people around this is the best thing you can do.
Yeah, that's a great word. So much comes to mind when you bring up this, when we talk about community, because I've read so many books where people shun, and even in my own experience, shun like SAA or SA. But, even if it's not the right fit for you, just starting, just going to something and diving in. Because if I had never gone to SA, I never would have known, like, hey, this isn't the right fit for me. But I could see and I can sense in myself that I was looking for that connection. I was looking for somebody to connect with in community. But even though that wasn't the right fit for me, but I think finding your tribe is absolutely one of the pillars to finding a place of healing for yourself and for, if it's your marriage or your whatever relationships that are important to you, that community becomes such a staple.
Yeah. And I love what you just said, which is, you know, just get started. Like, just try something out, even if it doesn't quite feel like the right fit, you can always try out different communities and you can change. You don't have to commit for the rest of your life, but just get started, start showing up in some of these intentional spaces, whether it's, a church group or a Buddhist Sangha or a men's group or a 12-step program. Get started and then, fine tune it and find a community that really you do resonate with the philosophy that they have and just the way that they run things and the feeling that you get by going there.
Well, I mean, vulnerability is something I personally struggled with all my life. And I think when you find your tribe and your community, being able to open up and be vulnerable and feel safe, that feeling of safety, which I think kind of falls under one of Maslow's needs, is so important, because I think often a lot of times men don't feel safe in their relationship. They don't feel safe at work. They don't, they don't feel like I've met guys who, like, they are deep into this trying to recover, and they have groups of men that have been their best friends for 30 years and they still can't tell them what they're going through. And it's fascinating to me to see that even though there's these strong bonds, that they don't feel safe. And so I think that's what connecting and being in a community of people who understand kind of what you're going through creates that place for safety and vulnerability.
hmm Yeah, and it's where I have to give a huge shout out to the people like in my group, but this is true for any one of these groups, a huge shout out to the people who are courageous enough to be that example for other people coming in. You know, when you have guys in the group who are able to hop on a call and say, yeah, you know, I really feel low today, or I really feel ashamed, or I'm just full of anxiety about my relationship. It's an example for the other guys that it's safe to open up and to share. So much kudos to the guys, you know, yourself included, the fact how vulnerable you're able to be with what you're going through. Um, the more that all of us can be that example for other men, I think we start to affect a change in society.
I love that. Want to shift gears just a little bit. The topic of, I know for me, when I was kind of in the thick of my acting out in my marriage, I didn't understand why. One, I was living in an unconscious world where I was just kind of allowing my body, my nervous system to just do whatever it needed to regulate. And one of the things that really struck me is just this eye-opening experience was kind of learning this concept of what drives that behavior. And I think it's this recipe that's different for everyone. I know the DSM-5, which is a diagnostic manual for therapists, it kind of states that sex is not an addiction, or they don't classify as an addiction. But recently my wife is currently going through her master's to get in counseling. She was reflecting to me that they have shown in science that the same things that get turned on with cocaine get turned on with porn. And I find it fascinating that you can be addicted to cocaine, but you can't be addicted to porn.
It's fascinating how that's the case. I mean, at this, it's bonkers to me that anybody with a credential would be out there saying, "Oh, you can't be addicted to porn, or you can't be addicted to sex." It's just, of course you can. I mean, when you know the stories that you and I know about how dark this addiction can get and what it can cause people, how far out of integrity it can cause people to go in order to get their fix. I mean, if that's not addiction, then what is addiction? You know, and so these people that are holding on to these outdated beliefs of it's not a real addiction, and you know, it came from a place of them thinking that, oh, this is just really sex negative people or prudes who are kind of demonizing sexuality, and it's just not true. The truth is, on a neurological level, it's the exact same neural pathways, whether you're addicted to cocaine or heroin or porn or social media. I mean, it triggers the same reward pathways and the same dopamine release, and neurochemically, it's the exact same thing. And it can get very serious.
Yeah, and for me, and I don't know from your own personal experience, I never really struggled with porn like I think traditionally some might struggle with it. For me, I think I was more addicted to the thought processes and the fantasies, because what would happen is like porn would become more of a gateway to deeper and darker things. I think I was introduced to porn at 10, and that was before the internet was around. It was via magazines and a couple of videos here and there that I found on a VHS in random places. And so there would be spurts where I would go through almost a decade without access to porn. And it wasn't until the internet came around that that access was kind of opened up. And I definitely would say I probably fall under that drive to be addicted to it. Are you familiar with the Coolidge effect?
The Coolidge effect? I'm
Yeah,
not
the
sure.
Coolidge effect. So the Coolidge effect, and you may remember the study, but it was a study done on lab rats or mice. I don't remember
Hmm.
specifically, but where typically in that environment, the female mouse or rat is the instigator of sex. And so it would come to the male and it would just want sex, want sex, want sex. And the male would engage in sexual behavior until it couldn't anymore. It would literally be the heart pounding, and it would reject all of the female's advances. And so they introduced a new female rat, and the male rat would just pick up like nothing had ever, just go like over and over and over again. And it would tire, and then they would introduce a new female. And it was this fascinating concept that they linked. Porn is identical to having a new partner over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And in another study, they would show the same porn to men over and over and over again to the point where they couldn't even get an erection. And then they would introduce a new porn, and everything would come back like never before. I mean, an erection, the arousal, all of this stuff. So it's just a fascinating concept that porn taps into a place in the brain that we can't even imagine. Like it's so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so the Coolidge effect, and it's really we are hardwired in some sense to kind of get that little hit of arousal from novelty. And porn directly taps into that desire for novelty and puts it on steroids. And every time you log onto a porn site, if you're on a tube site and you're scrolling through hundreds or thousands of videos a night, that's why people can get into these addictions where they're watching porn for 6 hours, 8 hours at a time, because as they showed with the rats in that study, they'll just keep going every time you drop a new female in. Even if the rat is on the brink of total exhaustion, you can just tap into that kind of physiology. And that's what happens for a lot of men with porn addiction.
What do you say to guys who that you've worked with personally? What is your stance, or what is your feeling on guys that say their needs aren't being met sexually by their spouse or their partner?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying there's a lot of nuance. It's a very complicated issue. It's not like a black or white. I wouldn't dare to sit here and say, well, that's not true. Your needs it's all in your mind, and you don't have any needs. Because the truth is, we do have needs for intimacy and connection. At the same time, a lot of those needs have been flamed. The flames of that have been kind of exacerbated by years or decades of porn addiction, or whether it's porn addiction or any other kinds of things that makes us think we need certain things. Some of that is not necessarily in a healthy range, and we can't put those needs onto our partner, especially if those needs are being influenced by a multi-billion-dollar porn industry that is making the most extreme things seem normal. I mean, these days, what seems normal is choking and spitting and slapping and anal and all these things, because that's what is primarily on these porn sites, because the most extreme thing is what sells. And so, if a guy says, well, I need these things, maybe it's because he's trained his brain to need them. And so there's a lot of area in the middle. There's a lot of gray area in here where it's saying, okay, can you recognize that you might not need the things you think you need? At the same time, honoring that intimacy is a human need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Someone once said to me, you weren't born wanting anal. If you, you just, it wasn't a thought in your mind. That had to have come from somewhere. And maybe through your own self exploration, I'm sure there are people who have touched themselves in that area and been aroused and had curiosity. And I think that's wonderful. But I think, like, you look at tribes in Africa, most of the women walk around mostly or partly nude. And you don't see people over screwing all over the place. It's just not, it's a different concept. So, I mean, yeah, I think porn definitely plays a huge part in that social norm, or that, maybe a masculine norm that has created this narrative that we think we need something. At the same time, you nailed it. We all need the intimacy, the eros, that energy, that sexual energy that builds up in us. We want to share that with somebody in a loving, connected way. And
Yeah. And there's a lot of, relationships are complicated. If there's a lack of intimacy in a relationship, it's just there's so many factors that can go into that, in terms of what is the cause of that, and also what is the solution to bringing back that intimacy. Might not just be, okay, well, let's have sex. It's, can we get curious about each other? Can we actually practice the non-sexual forms of intimacy? There's so much to explore in relationship in terms of intimacy that can then lead to physical intimacy.
I love that. Intimacy, I have learned during this process, is into you I see, or into me I see, which I find is a fascinating concept, because I had these delusional worldviews that said, and this is the typical love avoidant, what do you do for me? What do you do for me means you love me, you care about me, you see me. But that comes from a delusional place that is warped by those social and masculine norms, porn being one of them, TV shows, movies being the other, and there's so many others. But when I truly learned, like, this is what true love and intimacy is, it's not coming from a place of need to use you, I need to objectify you to get my needs met. It's more of, what do you need? I see you, and I love you, and I want to connect with you. And it's such an embodied experience that I'm not sure I can even fully explain. I know for 40 plus years of my life, I never really experienced that. And going through this has created this space where when I connect with my wife, it's not with an end goal. When I go to bed at night and we're cuddling, or I don't go there with this end goal of I've got to do X, Y, and Z and to fulfill my needs. I go there wanting to connect with her emotionally and check in with her, and what is it she needs. And it's become such an organic process. And making love to my wife and looking into her eyes has a whole different meaning because my brain is not running the whole time thinking about, oh, I got to do this position or this would feel good, or it's just being present. Anything you could say to that?
Well, I think it's making me think of just going back to that topic of what porn has done to our brains and a whole generation of men is we've trained ourselves to believe that if I have a sexual urge, I can get that need met instantly with no compromise, no work. I basically just pull out my phone, tap a few buttons, and I can get that need met. And it's all about me, me, me. It's very selfish. It's very quick fix, immediate gratification. And so then when we put 10 or 20 years of that behavior on a daily or nightly basis then onto our partner and say, why aren't you meeting my needs? Why am I not getting my needs met immediately without compromise, just in the way I want it? No wonder we're going to be kind of screwed up in terms of our expectations because we're used to getting our needs met with the flick of a finger and just how we want it. And so we need to retrain our brains that that's not how intimacy works.
That's a great word. I love that. Well, I know our time's coming to a close. You have been so instrumental in helping me launch this by answering questions and guiding me. I'm so thankful for that. I'm curious, what if you could say, is there one book or a book that you would say changed your life more than any?
Definitely Happiness by Mathieu Ricard. I mean, that it stands out for me as the book that changed my life. It's interesting because I've gone back to reread it now a couple times, and I wish I could find the same magic from it. But at this point, a lot of it is just so not old news, but it's stuff that to me now seems so obvious. I'm like, well, of course. But when I read it, it was completely revolutionary. And for many people who read it now, it still will be because it looks at this question of what is happiness? What really is happiness all about? Real happiness, not this kind of sickly sweet ecstatic bliss type of, oh, I feel good and I'm dancing with a smile on my face, but real inner contentment and inner flourishing. It looks at that question from this lens of both science and spirituality. And the reason that that book changed my life is that up until that point of reading that book, I was just under the impression that if I could just arrange all the circumstances in my life so that things were pleasant and good, and I got my needs met, and I got validated, and I had pleasure, and things felt good, then I would be happy. And because I was a high achiever, I was very good at figuring out how to arrange things in my life to get pleasure, to make things feel good all the time. I was captain of a sports team. I had a lot of friends. I had a lot of lovers. I was, the star student in all my classes. I knew how to get pleasure and I kept getting it. And it was empty and fleeting and unfulfilling. And I kept noticing that I keep achieving the things that I think are going to make me happy, but I still feel empty inside. And that led me down this kind of existential crisis where I was thinking, will I ever be truly happy? Will I ever be satisfied? And that, sent me down this little existential crisis. But fortunately, it led me to a bookstore where I ended up picking up some books on positive psychology and ended up finding this book called Happiness by Mathieu Ricard. This guy, Mathieu Ricard, is French, but he ended up becoming a Tibetan monk. And so he has a background. He was actually working at the Pasteur Institute, working on his PhD in molecular biology. So he has this background of science that I really appreciated, but then became a Tibetan monk. And so he also had this deep expertise in spirituality. And he blended these two, this science and spirituality, in a way that finally made sense to me, where he started looking at what is real happiness and what is suffering. And I started to see that suffering is when you want something that you don't have. When there's, you're like, oh, if I could just have that thing, but I don't have it, that is when you suffer. Or when there's something you have, but you don't want it, and you think, if I could just get rid of this thing, then I'll be happy. And that is also suffering. And that's what porn does to us. That's what these expectations do. If my wife could just give me this or that in bed, then I'll be happy. If I just had a more attractive wife, if I just had more money, then I'll be happy. And this creates all that suffering from craving what we don't have.
That's a good word.
And I realized that all of the times that I was logging onto porn, I was throwing fuel on the fire of my own suffering, hardwiring these neural pathways of craving, which was hardwiring the neural pathways of suffering. And that real happiness is about all these other things that we don't get taught in school, but like gratitude, compassion, being of service, having, patience and equanimity, having courage, living an ethical life. These are the things that actually lead to a sense of deep inner fulfillment. And that book, it was this almost scientific treatise. Like it laid it out so simply and so clearly that it was obvious. Like if you want to be happy, truly happy, there is a pathway. There are things you can do to cultivate that happiness. So that book totally just blew my mind, totally changed my life.
I love that. I'll have to pick it up. I hear in that message that the external world is where many of us think happiness lives, but true happiness and joy lives within.
That's it. I mean that, and it's so funny because we all kind of know that's true, and yet our actions don't show that we know that's true. We still think, yeah, but I want to buy this nice thing, or yeah,
Yep.
but if I
Yep.
just had that sex, then I'll be happy. And it's like we know that those things are just so fleeting. They don't really, and we know that you don't have to look far. You look at all these celebrities that are depressed and suicidal and miserable, and you can go to a third world country. I remember traveling in India when I was on this journey and going to these small villages where they had no material possessions, but they had these big beautiful smiles. And it's not to be naive and say, material possessions have no impact on your sense of well-being and that it doesn't matter. Of course, like having a roof over your head, having food, to take joy and comfort, those are beautiful things. But to understand that if we're placing all of our sense of happiness on attaining material possessions and having sense pleasure, we're going to lose.
Man, that's powerful. It reminds me of my own story during going through this recovery. I went to El Salvador, and here I am. I'm a CEO. I've had all the exotic cars and the $1 million home and the world's definition of success. And I was at rock bottom. And I'm looking around at these families who barely have a roof over their head, and the joy and the smiles on their face, and just talking with them, it was just this exuberance of just pure joy. And it really made me question like my beliefs and help me shape an understanding of like that everything we seek in life truly comes from connecting with others and finding our life's purpose. Those things bring such reward and joy internally. So I think that's huge, and I appreciate you sharing that book because I'm going to read it. My book was Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. I don't know if you've read it, but phenomenal
Yeah,
book.
great book. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the messages are very similar. It's like to look within and understand, as we're talking about at the start of this conversation, like all of your experience of reality comes through the lens of your consciousness, your choices, your just how you experience whatever's in front of you. Two people can have a big piece of chocolate cake in front of them, and one person will be snooty and arrogant and, "Oh, I don't like this. This isn't good enough. How dare they bring it out to me? Room temperature, whatever." And the other person might be just filled with gratitude. Like, wow, how blessed am I to have this piece of chocolate cake in front of me? I feel so happy. So
I
it's
love
all
that.
about our relationship to what we have and what we're experiencing.
I love that. Next question. What is something you believed 10 years ago that you no longer believe or do?
Whew.
Not a tough question at all.
I mean, I feel like there really have been so many things that I'm constantly learning. That's why I love the position that I'm in with the work I do is I get to learn on a constant basis, learn from experts, learn from my clients. I mean, I learn more from my clients than anyone else. I think if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I really would have thought that mindfulness was the most important thing. And I still think it's incredibly important. And in some ways it's essential that you need to have a component of mindfulness in there to have awareness of what's happening. You know, Connection and just being a good person. Exercise is all, in terms of like basic recovery. Before you start meditating, I would say start moving. Like start moving your body on a daily basis, start exercising. If you're in that rock bottom place, like if you're just looking for some help out of the hole that you're in, don't start meditating yet. First start moving and get exercise. That might be one of the kind of the biggest shifts that I went through.
I love that. That's something that I just recalled when I was in rock bottom and going through this. You helped me establish a routine of self-care. Something that I realized my entire life I had always put myself, even though I was a selfish individual who would put myself first, I'd always put myself last when it came to that. And, instituting things like reading, meditating, exercise, just making sure to drink water, simple things that I think are really easy to just kind of bury in the noise of life. You really helped me institute that to the point where even today, like I may not be completely up on my meditation practice, but I'm in a good place where like I can check in with myself and be like, something doesn't feel right. I haven't really been doing my self-care the way I normally would.
Yeah. And that's I mean, just these basic, just the fundamentals of self-care is so critical.
I love that. What's one thing that you would say any man who is in a place of maybe not rock bottom, like I call it low rock bottom. I know there's like a high rock bottom, but maybe there's a guy out there who he just knows inside he's got a problem. Where would they start? Where would that person start to kind of look a little deeper and try to understand like what's going on for them or what what may be happening in their environment?
I mean, I think we are so fortunate in our day and age to have so many podcasts, so many conversations with incredible people talking about their insights and their realizations about the ways porn was impacting them and what they did to get out of it. I would say find some podcasts to start listening to listen to other people's stories, because inevitably you will see yourself in their stories. You will say, that's what I've been experiencing, or that happened to me too, or I didn't realize porn could cause this and could lead to that. And that will give you the fuel to say, whoa, okay, this really is something I need to look at. And wow, this guy did it and saw these results and these benefits in their life, and they're so much happier now than they were before. That will also give you the fuel and the motivation. So if somebody's kind of sober curious, out there, and they're saying, "Well, I think I have a problem and maybe I need to give it up," listen to podcasts, read stories, and maybe get connected with a community. If you're at that stage where you say, okay, I want to get support, get connected with a community, with a coach, with a therapist, find a place where you can actually get support.
I love that. And that brings up the last thing is what is the best way for people to connect with you? Not only you personally, but to find you on, I know you're on YouTube and Spotify. So how do they find you there and how do they connect with you if they want to go deeper with maybe some private coaching or become a part of your community?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing is, if you resonate with what I'm saying, check out my podcast. That's the first place. Like before you even want to get involved in working with me or anything, just listen to stuff on my podcast. It's Unhooked on any podcast platform, same on YouTube. And that's a great place to start. And if you think, wow, I want to work with me or get connected to the community, then there's all kinds of links on my podcast, or you can go to unhookedacademy.com and learn about the men's group that I run, the online program that I have, or check in with me about one-on-one coaching. I do have kind of a limited number of spots for my one-on-one work.
Well, I am so thankful that you have spent this time today with not only the people that will watch this, but myself included. You've been instrumental in my life. I'm a testimony to some of the amazing work that you've done and you continue to do. My life is filled with so much joy, and I feel like such a different it's just a different experience. And so I'm so pleased and thankful and have so much gratitude for you, but also for the hopes that people will find you and connect with you and find those that resonate with what you're saying, because it's powerful. It is life changing. There is hope. Shame is this really, really deep thing that is so hurtful and painful to us men. You help pull me out of that shame. So I'm just so glad that you're doing what you do, and thank you for what you do, and thank you for being here today.
Right back at you, man. I'm so proud to see you doing this podcast and starting to do this work. I mean, you've gone through such a transformation, and I know that this work that you're doing, it's going to shine a light for a lot of people. So glad you're doing this work, and keep going.
Awesome. Thanks again, brother. Take care.